Every kid in America right now could have a free public college education if George W. Bush hadn't been such a warmonger. Let me explain. In early 2001, before the war in Afghanistan, the Taliban government in Afghanistan issued an edict to ban opium cultivation in that nation, saying it was a violation of Islam. Opium, of course, is the raw material for heroin. And it worked pretty well. In 2000, roughly 4,500 metric tons of opium was produced in Afghanistan. In 2001, after that edict, that fatwa, the number plummeted to less than 1,000 metric tons. Price of heroin went up around the world. The number of addicts, particularly in Europe, Russia, and America, dropped. The Bush administration was so impressed by the decrease in opium production that they gave $43 million to the Taliban to encourage a continued halt in opium production. Now, while $43 million may not seem like a lot, let's put that in context. At the time of the deal, Afghanistan's total GDP was just $2 billion, putting it at the bottom of global GDP rankings. It was literally the poorest country in the world. So for the Taliban, $43 million was a lot of money. And George W. Bush's decision to fork over $43 million to the Taliban to help curb drug trafficking use and abuse was actually a good choice and smart policy. Now, fast forward to the days and weeks after 9/11. On October 14th, it's like 2 weeks after 9/11. No, it's like a month and a week, 5 weeks after 9/11. Senior Taliban leader, Deputy Prime Minister Haji Abdul Kabir, sent an official offer to Washington, D.C., saying that the Taliban would be willing to arrest and hand bin Laden over to a third-party country if the U.S. stopped the bombing of Afghanistan. Kabir said, quote, "If America were to step back from the current policy, then we could negotiate, then we could discuss which third country." End of quote. But Bush, the same man who just months earlier had handed over a small fortune to the Taliban government, rejected this latest offer of cooperation. Instead, he took up a scorched earth policy and bombed Afghanistan back to the Stone Age. His decision to invade Afghanistan has cost our country over $713 billion since 2001. This for a country with a GDP of $2 billion. And that number is rising by the millisecond. In fact, every hour, the war in Afghanistan is costing we the people another $10.17 million. The Taliban offered to hand over bin Laden on a silver platter, but Bush said no, and now it's cost us hundreds of billions of dollars. But what if George W. Bush had taken up the offer from the Taliban and even sweetened the deal like he did with the opium? What if he did something similar to what he had done just months before and offered to give the Taliban money if they promised to cut down on terrorism and on al-Qaeda's presence and influence in that country, just like they cut down on the opium? We could have given the Taliban $2 billion, enough to double that nation's GDP and make everybody in the country twice as rich. And it still would have only been a drop in the bucket compared to what we've spent on the war in Afghanistan. And if we had done that, we would have saved ourselves enough money to provide a free public college education to every single eligible student in America. As The Atlantic points out, according to the Department of Education data, public colleges across America collected $62.6 billion in tuition from undergrads in 2012. $62 billion. This means that the federal government would have to only spend $62 billion to make public college tuition free for every student in America in 2012. That's less than 11% of what we spent on the war in Afghanistan. Less than 11%. Bottom line, George W. Bush had a chance to get America's priorities right, and he failed. Now, the good news is he's not in Washington anymore. So instead of spending trillions of dollars on prolonging the Bush legacy of unjust wars and torture and all, why don't we spend those trillions on the things that will make America great again? Why don't we invest in our intellectual infrastructure and give every eligible student in America a free public college education? We could do it. $62 billion? That's nothing. I mean, seriously, think of it. It's a fraction of what we've spent just on Afghanistan. Add Iraq to that. So